This episode is sponsored by my friends at Cisco. Nearly overnight, the entire world found itself adapting to a new way of working, carrying with it new advantages and challenges. Supporting a remote workforce, one with more freedom and flexibility than ever before, requires a new approach to support employees and customers while at the same time keeping the business moving forward. To be successful in this new landscape, businesses must consider modern remote work tools, intelligent workspaces for the return to work, recruiting talent, and critical leadership traits. Cisco is shaping this path forward in delivering the employee and customer experience. Visit futureofwork.webex.com to learn more. There's lots of great resources there like videos, articles, and a workplace maturity assessment tool. Also, I'm hosting a free live masterclass on the 5 behind-the-scenes key steps to putting people first as a leader, taking place on August 4th, 5th, and 6th. This is something we need now more than ever. I'll be going over what it means to put people first, and I'll be sharing 5 strategies on how to do so. Seats are very limited, so reserve a spot by going to leadpeoplefirst.com.
Look at the CEO's agenda, literally the agenda, and look how much time is carved out for innovation. Or take the company's last 4 most important meetings and look at how much time was carved out for innovation. And now here's what I would add. If it's not 40 to 60% of the CEOs, over 40 I'll say, let's put the bar a bit lower. If the CEO doesn't spend over 40% of his or her time on innovation, as a team lead, you actually want to really consider if it's worthwhile spending your time on innovation.
That's Alex Osterwalder, best-selling author of Business Model Generation, Value Proposition Design, and Testing Business Ideas. He also released a new book back in April called The Invincible Company: How to Constantly Reinvent Your Organization with Inspiration from the World's Best Business Models. Alex is ranked number 4 on the Thinkers 50 list of the top 50 management thinkers in the world, and along with Yves Pigneur, invented several practical tools, including the Business Model Canvas, which is used by millions of business leaders today. As a result, they won the Thinkers 50 Strategy Award in 2015. He's also the founder of Strategizer, a company that provides organizations with corporate innovation strategy, training, tools, and software. Today, Alex is sharing his advice on how to build an invincible company, one that can withstand uncertainties like the one we are all facing as a result of COVID-19. You will hear specific examples of organizations like Fujifilm, Ford, and HP who have been able to adapt in times of trouble while continuing to put their people first. Alex also shares what we need to change about leadership, what leaders can do to create a culture of innovation, how to evaluate your organization's innovation readiness, what to do if your CEO doesn't support innovation, and much more.
Organizations where you really see innovation take off, I'll give you a couple of examples. Obvious one is Amazon with Jeff Bezos really emphasizes the focus on innovation. I'll give you 2 less known ones. So Logitech, the CEO, Bracken Darrell, spends 40 to 60% of his time on innovation. That gives innovation power because it's symbolic if the CEO spends a lot of time on innovation. Then the next question is, so the CEO picks the winning ideas. No, the CEO creates the culture and metrics and spaces where innovation can emerge. And that is a partnership between innovation and execution. Those are 2 different domains, and they need to live in harmony, not kind of entrenched in a kind of war zone. So sometimes innovators like to call themselves pirates or rebels. I think that's silly because pirates and rebels get killed. Like, why would you want to be a pirate or a rebel? It's not about breaking the rules. It's about the leadership creating the right rules.
The world is changing quickly. What do you need to know and do in order to be successful now and in the future? From leadership to the future of work to employee experience, this show will give you the insights and the tools you need to succeed and thrive professionally and personally. Make sure to follow me on Spotify or subscribe to the show on your favorite platform. You can do so easily by going to futureofworkpodcast.com. Also, please rate the podcast on Apple Podcasts or whatever your preferred platform is. It really helps spread the word about the show, and I personally appreciate it. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Future of Work with Jacob Morgan. Before we get started today with my guest, if you get a couple seconds, please remember to rate or review the podcast on Apple Podcasts. And you can also follow the show on Spotify. And I also just put out a PDF called The Leadership Digest, which looks at 9 crucial skills and mindsets from leaders around the world, and it's based on 140 CEO interviews. You can grab that at theleadershipdigest.com. And today I am joined by Alex Osterwalder. He is the author of a new book called The Invincible Company. He's the co-founder of Strategizer, and a lot of you probably know him as being the creator of the business model canvas. Alex, thank you for joining me.
It's great to be here, Jacob.
Before we jump into all the fun business stuff, I'm really curious just about your background, your life. How did you grow up? How did you get involved into all the stuff that you're doing now?
Well, I could talk for an hour now, but I'm not sure if that would be the most interesting for the listeners. But I am a Swiss German. I was born in Switzerland in the German-speaking part. Then with my parents, we moved to Canada. So I did a little bit of my youth there, came back to Switzerland, then studied in the French-speaking part, actually political science, before going on with business studies and doing a doctoral dissertation on business model innovation. And then after that, just trying to bring these ideas to real companies throughout the world. Because, funny enough, the stuff I did as an academic, what got downloaded. So nobody told me. People would download a PhD dissertation. But that was a really, interesting signal. So we went on with my PhD supervisor, Yves Pigneur, back then to start writing books together. And then, everything else just kind of came out of that. The passion for innovation just happened from that kind of start. And little detail on the side, I'm married, I have 2 kids. They're my passion besides the whole business model innovation stuff.
How many languages do you speak?
Not enough. So in Switzerland, we grow up with 2 languages, right? So we have a mother tongue, that in my case, that's German. Then I learned French at school. I was terrible at it before I moved to the French-speaking part and studied in French. And I did learn English because my older sister, so she's 6 years older, when we came back from Canada, she decided she's going to speak English with me. So I was lucky enough to learn English through my sister. So 3 languages, a little bit of Spanish and Italian, not good enough. Love more of that. And I tried Thai, but Thai is very hard to learn. It's a tonal language.
I like how you say 3 languages, and then you're like, oh, by the way, a little bit of Thai, a little bit of this, a little bit. You speak like 20 languages.
Oh, only. That would be great. Like. That would be great. That's not the case.
So, curious, do you remember the first full-time job you had? Did you ever work for an actual another company before you went off and co-founded Strategizer?
I think I'm unemployable, so I don't think I really ever had a real job. So if you want, my first real-time, full-time job was as a assistant doing my PhD at the University of Lausanne, and my boss was my PhD supervisor, Yves Pigneur, who's now, long-term co-author, mentor, and friend. But I think that's the only real job I had. I did some freelance stuff as a journalist. I started a couple of entrepreneurial ventures, some of those never really became real big companies. But employed, I think the only one was as an assistant, and then other things were kind of side hustles for to earn money as a student.
I find that very interesting. And is this because, did you apply for full-time jobs and just the interviews didn't go well, or nobody followed up with you, or did you never even go down that path of trying to work for anybody else?
That's a great question, because I actually tried to get employed. Nobody wanted me, so but at the end of the day, I was always interested in creating new stuff. But I did do one job interview. It's a funny story. At McKinsey, the consulting firm, and because I didn't get that job, I was a disaster, right? So I was just not ready for that. Because I didn't get that job, I started working with Yves Pigneur. I did an interview with Yves Pigneur, and he became my co-author, longtime friend. So I did apply. Same thing after my dissertation. I actually tried to become an academic, and the universities where I applied they didn't want me. So funny enough, I made my own path, and now universities and consulting firms are calling me all the time to give talks there.
That's fascinating. Today there's clearly a lot of stuff that's happening as far as current events. What's kind of your general perception, your general thoughts on what's going on in the world, and maybe even specifically in the world of work?
I think it's very interesting times, and obviously very troubling for a lot of people. I mean, from the health aspect to the job security aspect to, if you're a leader, you have to change your behavior. So extremely, I'd say, challenging in positive and negative ways, right? So some are on the positive side and some are on the negative side. So I'm lucky enough to be on the side to really say, wow, this is a very strong opportunity for the kind of work my team and I do, because we've always believed in software platforms and using software to help innovate. So we were kind of catapulted into an interesting position where all of the multinationals we work with, they continue to work with us because they want to do everything online, and that's what we do, right? We call it technology-enabled services. What that means in a general sense, I do think, is that what happened in the world of work, given this entire context with COVID-19, the best and the worst came out of people and organizations, right? So both, right? Some organizations, the way they separated paths from people, how they fired them was terrible. Like, it was just not, it really showed the weaknesses of some organizations and their leadership. And then on the other hand, you have organizations that really started to shine. They also, some had to separate paths because, sometimes you just can't survive with all of the people you have. A good example is Airbnb. But the way they did it showed how respectful they are of their team. Sometimes you have to make these hard calls, but it's how you execute them that show, if you're a great organization or not. So I do believe this has really brought out the best and the worst of people and organizations. And people won't forget, right? So the way you treated people during this crisis, this pandemic, will stick with them forever. You could have been, a great employer before, but now we're really, get serious. They will remember, that's for sure. So I think it's an interesting time just to see, where do you want to be? I think people also start to ask themselves, do I really want to be at this organization, at this company that treated me like this? And others say, wow, I really believe our culture is shining because we did, this is a company that really respects me as a human being and as a team member that is trying to do the best work.
I'm really glad that you brought that up because I think that's a very, very important point. And you mentioned Airbnb. I think Marriott was another good example of a company where, their CEO, who's himself, I believe, going through cancer treatment, did this video, and you could see he's getting very emotional. He's getting teary-eyed as he's talking about his people. And then you see other organizations, and does one come to mind for you as far as the wrong way to do this? Obviously, Airbnb, you said, they had to let go of their people, but they did it in a very human way. Who do you think did it the wrong way?
I don't really like calling out organizations.
I know, I figured.
But I'll tell you the reason why. I'm okay to really clearly talk about things I don't agree with, but when you haven't been involved in a decision and in the execution, you don't always know all of the reasons. So all I want to say before I mention some names is these are not easy things to do, to execute and to implement. So I don't want to downplay, what some of the leadership in companies are going through. It's hard. It's really hard to do.
It is.
And now it's easy to sit on a chair and say, look, those guys did a really bad job. They're terrible. When you've never had to manage a multi-billion-dollar company. That as a caveat before I start pointing out some names. I'd first say the characteristics that I, didn't shock me, but that I really think came out in this crisis, in this economic environment. So companies that really, they had this tradition of buying back shares, of cutting, really cutting back, cost cutting to a very extreme extent. And then, comes a crisis like this, a pandemic, and the first thing they do is ask for money from the government. So if you want to be, a capitalist organization, you also need to live with the consequences that if you didn't manage your company the right way before, well, don't start asking for money when it gets hard, right? Because I do believe companies that did a good job before the pandemic, are better equipped for a situation like this. And I do think Airbnb, though they had to let go of 25% of their staff, was much better equipped for this situation because, it's very difficult, and it's a miracle that they're even alive and that they didn't go bankrupt. A company that and again, I don't know the case very well. I tangentially read about it, so it just kind of shocked me the 2-3 things that I picked up.
I wonder if we're thinking about the same one, so I'm very curious who you're going to say.
Okay. I was thinking of Disney.
Okay.
In the sense that, look, it's very clear that Disney had to do something because a lot of their revenue and profit comes from theme parks and, physical activities, and from movies in cinema. So it's very clear they had to do something. So I'm not criticizing that they had to take action. It's kind of how they've done it and what they've done before, this whole bonus and culture, and then, letting people go in maybe not the best and most human way. While as a company, the kind of the tradition of Disney is this kind of family-friendly organization. So the way they did it disturbed me. I'm not criticizing the decision that they had to cut back, because again, Airbnb had to do that as well. That is something that I found a bit disturbing.
What did they do for people?
I don't know if you were thinking about that company.
No, so I'll tell you the one that I was thinking of. But for people who are not familiar with what Disney did, can you give a little bit of context around what did you not like about what you read from their approach?
Well, it's difficult when some of the leadership still gets bonuses and, you're not first doing everything you can to protect the people in your organization before you start cutting back. So I think they could have cut money, cut back in other places before they start firing people. And then the way they did the mass firings, and I don't want to go into details there, because again, I wasn't involved. I don't know the behind the scenes. I just found that it was a very aggressive way of letting people go. And to a certain extent, I do think so let me make it a little bit broader. And now we're completely outside of the innovation topic, but I do think the American US type of capitalism is really seeing its limits with this pandemic. When you have so many unemployed because, companies let them go and there's a very weak safety net, I think that's very dramatic. And I think it's really showing the limits, and it maybe is, hopefully, the end of this type of capitalism. So I'm not against capitalism, but I'm more for the Swiss or Nordic type of capitalism where you have competition, but you also have a strong protection of people, not protection of companies, but a protection of people. And what's happening now in North America is that companies are holding out their hands for money from the state. Again, well, that's not very capitalist-like. And you say, well, it's extraordinary situations. I think in Europe we do see, and it's not about pitching Europe against the US, is really a milder form of capitalism in some countries in Europe, and it's showing its strength right now. So I do think organizations around the world and economies to a certain extent will have to rethink the way they do things. Again, I'm absolutely for competition, for capitalism, for growth, but I also think it can't be at the expense of people in companies, because that's the foundation of a company, and society, because that's what we're here for. If we have shitty organizations and terrible companies and terrible leadership, and we have to suffer so much, we're probably doing something wrong. And the statistics, it was a Gallup poll that just showed that I think 8 out of 10 people are not engaged at work. There's something wrong in organizations today and in some of the ways we compete. So I think we can do better than that. And that's where innovation comes in. I think innovation is not just at the goal of making more money and growing. That's a thing that's part of the game, but the real value of innovation is creating more value for customers, more value for organizations, more value for employees, and ultimately more value for society and the environment. If we don't respect that innovation is about value creation for all of those stakeholders, then we can ask ourselves, well, what are we doing? So I'm, we're now in a more philosophical field, but I do think we're going through substantial changes, and I'm positive that we come out of it stronger and we will do better things because we've seen the limits of the system so far.
I certainly hope so, and you're right. I mean, some of the stuff in the States is completely bonkers, especially, I mean, you touched on some of them. The big payouts that CEOs get is just, and there's no words. Like I really don't even know what to say about it. Everybody knows that it's complete bullshit, and nobody does anything about it. So the one thing that I'm fascinated by, though, is there have been some companies in the past. So, for example, I had Per Uhlenhammer as a guest on the podcast, and he was the CEO of Volvo. And we were talking about the same thing. And he said, I had to deal with the oil crisis. I had to deal with recessions in the 80s and the 90s. And he said, I didn't lay off anybody. And this is manufacturing. These are people on the assembly line. And he said, I didn't have to lay off anybody. So why are people having to lay off people now? Or why are leaders having to lay people off now? And the same thing, I had Bob Chapman. I don't know if you know Bob. He's the CEO of a company called Barry Waymiller, and they have 12,000 employees, also in manufacturing. And he was talking about the 2008 financial crisis, where he had his entire board basically telling him, "Hey, you gotta fire like a massive percentage of your workforce." And he too did not let go of anybody. So part of me wonders, and I don't know what you think about this, if we really need to be letting go of people, like, do you think that it's, are leaders just scared to come up with new ideas? Are they scared to innovate in this area? Are they just putting the numbers first? Like, is there really no way to really put the people first in some of these situations?
So, look, that the answer to that question is very contextual, right? So I do frankly believe there's situations where you don't have another choice, where you have to make that decision, because if you don't, you really risk that the company goes bankrupt, right? And then you haven't served anybody, because then everybody, is jobless. So there are those situations. Now, I do think sometimes leaders act too fast on firing because it's possible in the States. But I think the bigger opportunity is what you do before. You can create an organization that is more resilient in these times of crisis, right? So it's not now that we can change our behaviors. Some of that, and because even if you have to let go of people as a hard decision, how you do it makes a huge difference. Sometimes you just have to. However, I do believe, and this comes, a little bit back to the book that we just published, The Invincible Company, you can create more resilient organizations. And that does mean you invest not just in executing what you have and cutting back costs, but creating a space, and I don't mean a physical space, a cultural space, an organizational space in terms of metrics, in terms of skills, where you have team members inventing the future. That is the entrepreneurial innovation arm of the organization. If you are in a crisis, those are the people who can come up with new solutions rapidly, because they can pivot faster, because they're comfortable with uncertainty. Because what basically happened with the pandemic now is it's one big disruption that affected everybody, and only few organizations positively, like Zoom or Netflix, and then there are a couple of industries that benefited from this. But most of us, are in a tricky situation. I do believe you can build that resilient organization. It also means that rather than buying back shares, you have a war chest, wrong word probably, but you have reserves for these kind of situations. So again, I think that the real work happens before to create more resilient organizations. In a crisis, sometimes you really don't have the choice. And then, of course, depending on what industry you're in, it gets more difficult. But the more general theme, I do think, that really, it's an area I would like to dive into more in the future, is extremely agile, fluid organizations. And that's beyond the traditional agile that we talk about. It's organizations that are able to reallocate resources rather than firing people. That means you might have a division around a certain product, but once the product becomes obsolete, or the service or that part of the business, you're able to kind of move fluidly the resources from that area into a new area. I'll give you a wonderful example, a historic one: Kodak versus Fujifilm. Kodak went bankrupt because they weren't able to dramatically reallocate resources. So their analog film business tanked, they got disrupted, they died. They did some things, but they didn't do it aggressively enough. Then you have Fujifilm, who was the number 2 in analog film back then, where the CEO and chairman was so obsessed by the company dying that they aggressively reallocated resources. And guess what? They were in analog film, like Kodak. What's the most obvious thing you could shift towards? Cosmetics. Sounds intriguing, right? Well, here's the thing. The chemicals, processes, intellectual property related to aging film can be used in cosmetics for aging skin. So they actually took, a lot of their heritage in analog film and applied it to different areas like health sector, cosmetics, etc. So they aggressively reallocated resources. A more, recent example that I like a lot is a Swiss-American company called Logitech. A lot of us are probably right now using Logitech cameras and microphones and stuff. They, when the PC industry started to shrink, they were big in PC peripherals like mice and so. They shifted dramatically. The CEO, Bracken Darrell, shifted 70% of the resource, 75% of the resources into new growth areas. And the way he likes to call it is, at Logitech, they say they have trees, plants, and seeds. The trees was the peripherals business. The trees are starting to fall over. He aggressively took 75% of the resources and put them into the seeds. Typically, the PC gaming industry, which is a very different industry and is growing, was one they invested in heavily. So that is that ability to be more resilient and constantly reinvent yourself will help you in an extreme pandemic like today. So I think, again, it's the organizational structure that you build before that will allow you to work differently in an extreme disruptive situation now. It's not enough to say, okay, now we're going to change. It's too late. You've never built that resilient company. Guess what? You can't do it overnight. So it's the upfront work.
So I had the chief human resource officer of HP here, Tracy Keogh, and she was telling me this story about how, and I think this relates to your example, but it's probably not at as grand of a scale as some of the ones that you've mentioned. But she was telling me the story how they have a lot of merchandisers at HP, people who are typically working in retail stores. And obviously during this pandemic, they can't work in retail stores. And so they were trying to find an option. What could these people do? They didn't want to lay them off. And they took, I think it was a couple hundred of these merchandisers, and they shifted them to help with customer service. Because it turns out if you're a merchandiser, you know a lot about the products, you know a lot about how they work, and you have a lot of knowledge that you can provide to the customers. So they took all these merchandisers and they said, you know what, until this is over, you're going to be on the customer service and support team, and you're going to help customers figure out their issues. And that very much reminds me of some of the examples that you gave of being able to just kind of pivot, see where you have employees who have a certain skill, and move that into another area. So that's the one that I thought of.
I love that example, and it really shows. We often say that the human resources, that the war for talent. Again, bad word. I don't like using the word war in this context, but we talk so much about people. Well, then let's actually try to keep them in these kinds of situations, right? So you can't upskill people, try to engage them, and then when it gets difficult, say, hey, look, sorry, we have to cut costs, you're fired. You're going to lose a lot of people and goodwill and knowledge, right? So I do believe it's just common sense to figure out a better way. And I do think, that even in these kind of extreme situations, it's really good management and good leadership that makes the difference. So I'm a huge fan of Alan Mulally, who turned around Ford when they were making a $17 billion loss. Like, it can't get much more extreme than that. And he turned around the company without government money, while all other car companies were holding out their hands for government support. Ford didn't. So under the leadership of Alan Mulally, he turned around the organization because he worked on the culture. It wasn't just about the traditional turnarounds, style of being extremely aggressive and firing people. No, it was good management that led to that. I had the opportunity to spend some time with Alan Mulally, and it's just impressive. That style of leadership is something that is still very rare. That engaging leadership that he was, doing first at Boeing and then after at Ford, really, really impressive. And I do believe that it's still kind of an art, to be a good leader. And we have some stereotypes of leadership that I think are just outmoded, right? And we need to go back to kind of the fundamentals and create a different kind of leadership for different times. I do think the global competitive environment is very different today. So you need a different style of leadership, different style of organizations as well, right? So there are a lot of things that need to change. And again, what's great about the pandemic, and I don't want to downplay the tragic things that come with this pandemic, but there's also an upside. So I do think we need to focus on that upside, which is this was so eye-opening to so many people from the top to the bottom, to the left to the right of organizations, that this is a great opportunity now to change, because everybody was shaken so much. You need that aggressive kind of shaking for people to realize we can't just go on as we did before. There were too many things that were broken. So again, the great and the worst, the best and the worst came out of people and organizations. That makes it very visible towards what we should shift more. And I would be very hopeful that we're going to focus on what we can fix and what we should fix, rather than just going back to business as usual with many broken organizations.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some of those things that we should be fixing. And maybe we can start with leaders. Because a lot of people who listen to this podcast are either leaders themselves now, or perhaps they want to be leaders. Everybody is engaged with leadership in some way. So what is it about leadership that you think needs to change?
Again, I'm not a leadership expert, right? So I can talk about kind of the anecdotes and bring it back to the whole theme of resilient companies and creating innovation engines.
Yes. Yes.
So I do think there's still this stereotype of the leaders who know, the leaders who decide, who need to pick the right ideas, etc. Well, guess what? If you are smarter than the domain matter experts you work with, then you failed in your hiring. So you actually, as a leader, need to assemble the right team of people who are good in their field, and then you orchestrate that, right? So if you have a chief marketing officer who you have to educate on marketing, it sounds silly what I'm saying, right? But you want somebody who is better and smarter than you in that particular field. So what is then the job of the leader if it's not about knowing, those kind of things? It's about creating the environment for great ideas to emerge and succeed. The conditions you create, right? The culture you create in the organization, the type of processes and metrics you put in place. So it's not about deciding on, which idea are we going to invest in, what are we going to do here or there, but it's about creating the right environments. So if I bring it back to innovation and the resilient company, in innovation, there's still a little bit this myth that we can pick the great idea, we're going to invest, a couple of $100 million into that, and we'll have a new $1 billion growth engine. That is delusional, because what we know from innovation is that you can't pick the winner, and that at the beginning, bad ideas and good ideas actually look pretty similar. So what can we do if we can't pick the ideas? Well, what you need to do is create the right environment where a company invests in, the number is somewhere between 100 and 200 projects, a little bit of money, but then after a very short amount of time, kills 70% of those and invests only in 30%. It's a little bit like venture capitalists do. A company in Germany called Bosch, 400,000 employees, big engineering company, does exactly like that. Over 3 years, they invested in 200 projects, but just 3 months. After 3 months, they give them 120,000 euro for those 3 months, each team. They kill 70% of the projects. They only invest in 30%. Those 30% get 300,000 euro, and they get a little bit more time, maybe 6 months or so. Again, after 6 months or so, they kill 75% of the projects. So of the original 200, only 15 make it to execution. So it wasn't the leadership that decided on the ideas per se, it was the evidence that showed if they would get follow-up investment. So what's the leader's role? It's about creating the right environment where these teams can explore, fail a lot, and learn. The environment where the teams that didn't get follow-up investments are not kind of stigmatized as losers because they couldn't get the project right. No, that's a normal ratio. From early stage venture capital, we actually know that 1 out of 250 ideas is an outsized winner. So it's that kind of culture you need to put in place so we don't start to stigmatize those who didn't succeed because they're contributing to the portfolio. So as a leader, again, you shouldn't be the expert, because then if you are, you hired wrong. That obviously depends on kind of the domain you're in. And your main job is to create the conditions for success to emerge. So, that is one of the messages, that I found really, really intriguing from Alan Mulally. He likes to say, sometimes as a leader, you can create too much value. For example, you go to a business unit and you casually make a comment, could you explore this? And then the team, because they heard it from the boss, they think they need to do this. So they're going to focus all of their efforts on that because they heard it from the CEO. While the CEO didn't want to influence that. You know what I mean?
I heard a very similar story. I'm trying to remember who it was that I was speaking with. It was the CEO of a company, and he was telling me how one time he went to go visit a new office space that they were building. And he saw some art on the wall, and he said, oh, you know what? That art looks really good. And the next thing he knows, they take that art and they put it everywhere in all the offices. And he's like, what's going on? Like, why is this art everywhere? And they said, oh, because you liked it. And he's like, no. I didn't mean to put it everywhere. I just was saying that, that I like it. And I think you're right that sometimes when the leader says something, we can misinterpret that as, oh, that's what we should do. He likes it. We got to do it. And that's not always the case.
And that's why you need a different kind of. So Ray Dalio has been pretty famous.
Yes.
For putting in place a system at Bridgewater, that really allows ideas from anywhere to succeed. I think it might have been a little bit more on the aggressive side of a culture. So I would love to see that kind of culture emerge where the best ideas can win, for wherever they come. And it's not the biggest, and nicest business card that succeeds. So we're talking about stereotypes here, but there's still a lot of that left in companies. And I think we need to really fight against it.
This episode is sponsored by my friends at Cisco. Running a hybrid workforce of both remote and in-office employees requires a new approach. To be successful in this new landscape, businesses must consider modern remote work tools, intelligent workspaces for the safe return to the office, and critical leadership traits. Cisco is shaping this path forward. Visit futureofwork.webex to learn more and get access to cool tools and resources like videos, articles, and a workplace maturity assessment tool. Also, I'm hosting a free live masterclass on the 5 behind-the-scenes key steps to putting people first as a leader, taking place on August 4th, 5th, and 6th. This is something we need now more than ever. I'll be going over what it means to put people first, and I'll be sharing 5 strategies on how to do so. Seats are very limited, so reserve a spot by going to leadpeoplefirst.com. What can you as a leader do to create that culture? Because it's not like, let's say, for example, I'm leading a very conservative culture. I can't just go to my people now all of a sudden and say, hey, everybody, I want you to give me your ideas and we're going to vote on it, right? I mean, doesn't this require like long-term kind of systemic change? Like, where do you even begin to try to change this culture to create one of entrepreneurship or innovation?
Yeah, so I like to say that you shouldn't let culture just happen. You need to design and manage it. And then people, say, Alex, you can't say that. You can't design culture. Yes, you can. So if we take innovation, we know that there are a couple of areas that you need to invest in to get innovation off the ground. And I'll give you a very simple starting point. Innovation today doesn't really happen in many organizations because it lacks power. Because often the CEO is mainly focused on executing and managing the existing. And I'm not saying that it's bad, that we need to manage the existing, but if innovation doesn't have enough power, it's always going to play the second fiddle, right? So organizations where you really see innovation take off, I'll give you a couple of examples. Obvious one is Amazon with Jeff Bezos really emphasizes the focus on innovation. I'll give you 2 less known ones. So Logitech, the CEO, Bracken Darrell, spends 40 to 60% of his time on innovation. That gives innovation power because it's symbolic if the CEO spends a lot of time on innovation. Then the next question is, so the CEO picks the winning ideas. No, the CEO creates the culture and metrics and spaces where innovation can emerge. And that is a partnership between innovation and execution. Those are 2 different domains, and they need to live in harmony, not kind of entrenched in kind of war zones. So sometimes innovators like to call themselves pirates or rebels. I think that's silly because pirates and rebels get killed. Like, why would you want to be a pirate or a rebel? It's not about breaking the rules. It's about the leadership creating the right rules so we can do both.
Yeah,
world-class execution and world-class innovation.
What about, some leaders might be listening to this thinking, you know what, I just don't have an innovative team. I try to get my people to come up with ideas, but nobody says anything. Nobody speaks up. Nobody, they don't have ideas. So I have to do it all myself. Do you ever get that response?
If I hear a leader say that, I'm very careful because it probably means that the people who have ideas and know what could or should be done, they've just been punished so often for actually exploring ideas that they don't dare anymore. So you have a cultural problem. So I think that's kind of what you see there. So in leaders who try to do it themselves are going to get it wrong. I have never seen in my entire career an organization, I'm talking about organizations bigger than 10 people, but let's say 100 or 300 people or more, I've never seen an organization that was lacking ideas or lacking innovative or entrepreneurial people. I've never seen it in organizations of a certain size. I'd say 100 to 300 people or more. They're always there.
Yeah.
I have seen the situation that you just said right now where people are not incentivized to innovate. So guess what? They won't open their mouth. I had an interesting conversation with another thinker, doer called Scott Anthony. So he wrote a couple of amazing books on innovation. And we were talking about blockers and enablers for innovation culture. And he said, well, Alex, probably we just need to tear down the blockers, and innovators, who are intrinsically interested in innovating, they will start to innovate. So the very first thing you need to do to create an innovation culture is tear down all of the blockers that are preventing people from innovating. I'll give you a simple one. Business plans. Companies still ask teams to write business plans for innovation. That's the worst thing you can do. It's the enemy of innovation. A business plan is an execution document. You describe a dream in detail and you execute. Innovation is about picking an idea, adapting it, and changing it until you create value and for the company and the customers. So it's a very different dynamic approach. So by tearing down the blockers like business plans, like the wrong metrics, only execution-focused metrics, will help you put innovation in place. And Jeff Bezos actually in his shareholder letters talks about that all the time publicly. So all we need to do is read those letters and start to copy that innovation culture. There are a lot of things that we might criticize of Amazon, but innovation culture is something they do really well.
Yeah, I agree. And Scott Anthony, I think he's one of the co-founders of Innosight. Right? Is that who you're talking about? So I actually had Mark Johnson on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, who's the other co-founder of Innosight.
Excellent.
And we talked a lot about this stuff as well. So I think it aligns very well with what you're saying. So from this, where can leaders begin? So let's say you're not the CEO and you are maybe a mid-level leader. You're responsible for a team and you want to start to create this culture of innovation. You want to start to build this invincible team. Do you have some specific advice for where leaders can begin and what they should do first? Like as soon as they're done listening to this podcast and after they grab your book, what should they be doing?
I would suggest they perform the Rita McGrath test. So Rita McGrath is a scholar at
also
Columbia,
a previous guest.
Awesome. Oh, you have great people. I'm happy I'm a part of this group. So Rita says, she has this great thing where she says, look at the CEO's agenda, literally the agenda, and look how much time is carved out for innovation. Or take the company's last 4 most important meetings and look at how much time was carved out for innovation. And now here's what I would add. If it's not 40 to 60% of the CEOs, over 40, I'll say, let's put the bar a bit lower. If the CEO doesn't spend over 40% of his or her time on innovation, as a team lead, you actually want to really consider if it's worthwhile spending your time on innovation. Because
oh wow. Okay.
You're fighting against windmills. Like you don't want to be Don Quixote fighting against windmills. So what you really want to know first, is your environment fit? We call it innovation readiness. Is your environment ready for innovation to happen? If you, after the Rita McGrath test, you see it's not, then you can ask yourself, who in the company at the very top level could be sponsors to get on board to support innovation. But you need that top level protection, I'd say, because otherwise all you're going to do, and unfortunately we still see this in quite a few companies, all you're going to do is innovation theater. No company is lacking innovation activities. There's incubators, there's all that kind of stuff. I'm not even talking about ping pong tables. I'm talking about real innovation activity. But as long as it's not connected to strategy, it's really a little bit of a suicide mission. I know a lot of innovation leads are up for that suicide missions. That's why they call themselves rebels and pirates. But I think we need to be a little bit more pragmatic and, first understand how ready is the company, and then based on that assessment, either change the job or say, okay, here's the strategy. So one person, I don't want to call out the name or the company, but one innovation lead in a pharmaceutical company, one of the global leaders in pharmaceuticals, he was very smart. He knew, okay, we're not entirely ready, but I'll get a board member as a sponsor, and then I will start working on quick wins. So rather than going for the multi-billion-dollar wins that they would only get maybe over 5 years or a decade, he would start to get the protection required. He got a fund to invest in internal teams who could go through this process. But the really, really important part is first get the protection and then work on the quick wins before you create the ideal situation. And in their case, they really put in place a really interesting innovation engine, a little bit like I explained for Bosch. They did that in the pharmaceutical industry. But again, do the Rita McGrath test first, just for the reality check to see how much you're fighting against the windmills.
Do you ever get people push back and just say, we don't have time? We have so many priorities. We're trying to look at talent. We're trying to look at redesigning our workspaces. We're thinking of diversity and inclusion as a priority. We have, competition. Like, there's just so much stuff out there. How do we give so much time to innovation? How do you deal with? I mean, is that ever an objection around time or resources?
So, not in my case. I mean, maybe I'm just fortunate enough to get called in when companies are already interested. So I don't try to convince anybody of anything, because I think that's a hopeless cause anyways. So I can just get them interested, and try to reframe their thinking. I'll give you an example. I was with a global financial leader in Paris before the pandemic, and the CEO, or actually the head of innovation, brought me in. She has a very good relationship with the CEO, and it was an interesting conversation. And I was talking about the whole approach of, okay, if you want to create a resilient company, if you want to create the invincible company, what you have to do is create an ongoing portfolio of innovations in addition to your portfolio of existing business models that you're managing. And rather than saying, oh, we can't do that, that takes up a lot of energy, the thing was, oh, wow, we haven't done enough of that portfolio approach. While they were doing innovation, they clearly understood. The reason I believe today very few companies say we don't have time for this, because it's a matter of survival. So, my friend Steve Blank, who launched the whole lean startup movement, he likes to say startups used to be ankle biters, okay, just annoying. Today, those are killer machines. And guess why? Because startups are the main disruptors and they are extremely well funded. Let me give you an example that we all know. Tesla, okay? The car industry should have done what Tesla did, but it took an outside disruptor to do this. And the reason Tesla could do this is because Elon Musk was able to raise so much money. So today, outside disruptors are so well funded, they're actually much better funded than internal innovation teams, because R&D is not innovation. R&D is just technology research. Sometimes it leads to new products or services. It rarely leads to new growth engines. So today, leadership is aware innovation is a matter of survival increasingly. Last point, sorry I get excited about this, so I just go on, but last point is you need to tell leadership that there are three types of innovation. Sounds trivial when I say it, it's actually not. And I take this from Clay Christensen and others. There's efficiency innovation. That's about making your processes and existing business model better, okay? Now, if your industry is dying, your business model is dying, efficiency innovation with very sophisticated technology will only help you die more efficiently. Think of Kodak. Efficiency innovation couldn't save them. Now, sustaining innovation, right, is new products that replace old ones. Kodak invented the digital camera. Okay, Kodak invented it, so it wasn't a lack of innovation, but it was product innovation. It was sustaining kind of their business model of photography. But it killed the real business model. So what they should have done is the third category, transformative innovation, really exploring completely new fields with new business models. The Amazon Web Services, right, of Amazon. So if you ask leaders, what are the most successful innovations you had the last 3 years? 95% will fall into efficiency innovation, 5% in sustaining innovation, 0% in transformative innovation. You need to visualize that with the leadership team so they understand we're doing nothing to invent the future. Only few companies really invent the future, and they do it really well, and they're top of the game, right? The Apple's out there, Ping An, good Chinese example, yep. Amazon. But this is, and one last thing, this is not just for big companies. So sometimes when I say this, everybody says, Alex, but that sounds like just stuff for big companies. It's exactly the same for small and medium-sized companies at a different scale. But it's the same logic, the same kind of cultural transformation you have to go through. So this is not just for big companies. This is a matter of survival for all types of companies.
I also really like that you say invent the future, because I think a lot of people always say things like, what's the future of work? And they assume that it's something that happens to them. It's something instead of something that they need to invent and create. So I love that message. What are some of the common mistakes that you see leaders making when it comes to trying to create an invincible company? Are there any major pitfalls that you see happen time and time again?
Yeah, I think so. A couple of myths again. When we say innovation, we often think technology, right? It's like, oh, same thing. You need technology to innovate. No, you don't. So I like destroying that myth first, because otherwise we think too much R&D. We just think technology and product. I'll give you a beautiful example. The Nintendo Wii, when they launched it, was an inferior technological platform in terms of game console. Was not as good as the Sony PlayStation 2 at the time or the Xbox. But here's what they did right. They served an underserved market, casual gamers, with a fun product and motion control and simple games tailored to casual gamers. So they were able to disrupt an entire industry with inferior technology. So innovation is just about creating value for customers and your organization. And that may be done with or without technology, but it can even be done with inferior technology. So innovation based on technology is a small subset of the overall innovation space. That's the first mistake, that people focus too much on technology. Think of it, banking, fintech. No, it's about creating value for customers and for your organization, for your bank. May or may not involve technology. The second big mistake is people think, okay, I'm a large company, I make a multi-billion dollars in revenues. I need to make big bets to have a big return. That is actually the worst recipe. Vinod Khosla, well-known venture capitalist, he likes to say, the more money you give a team, and this is for the startup world, same for corporate ventures, the more money you give a team, the likelier they are to not succeed. Why is that? You give companies too much money, what are they going to do? They're going to build something nobody wants. Think of Quibi or Quibi, I don't even know how to pronounce it.
Oh, yeah.
They raised $1.7 billion. Yeah, guess what they did? They built something nobody wants.
Yeah, I don't think that is going to...
Crazy.
Yeah, I can't imagine that being in existence that long. And they got Katzenberg and Meg Whitman. And
very powerful team.
It's unbelievable. And yeah, I can't possibly imagine this company surviving much longer.
It's not going to. So here's the thing, right? They had money, they had talent, but what they didn't have is an entrepreneurial approach and an innovation approach. So in innovation, you actually need to invest like venture capitalists, starting with small amounts of money first. You only do follow-up investments when you see traction. And when you scale, when you move into the scaling phase, then the investments get bigger. So you don't give a lot of money upfront. You give a lot of money when the risk has been reduced enough to really know now we can scale. And that is, talking about the future work, in terms of innovation, that's becoming a real profession in companies where we have different processes, different metrics, different skills, where some team members are going to be focused only on innovation. I like to even call it, the paid entrepreneurs. You're on the payroll of your company to do only one thing. It's be an entrepreneur. And that doesn't mean, start with $1 billion to implement an idea that doesn't work, but actually to be one of those hundreds of entrepreneurs in a company, and hopefully you're one of those who get follow-up investments. If you don't, doesn't matter, because you're getting a salary. So it's a much nicer form of entrepreneurship, because you don't have, Steve Blank likes to call this the gun to your head of the money running out.
And entrepreneurship, it requires a certain type of person too, right? Entrepreneurs are definitely not the typical cog in the company. The way that they think, the way that they act, they're scrappy. It definitely requires a certain, I think, type of skill set and mindset to be that entrepreneur in the company.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, sometimes people leaders like to say, we don't have that type of person. I believe they do, What they don't have is the environment for these types of people to thrive. So, it's these people who've tried once or twice and, they've just got, it doesn't work. It's career suicide. So they leave the company, they go to a competitor, and then ultimately, one day they're going to create their own company because there are very few companies. It is changing. That's the good news. Few companies who have really, really great innovation systems, innovation and entrepreneurial systems. Again, companies are not lacking innovation activities, but what they're lacking is a real innovation engine that produces real results. So a lot of incubators produce zero results, and then they get cut. That's the first thing when the pandemic hits, but that's because they didn't produce results up front.
Yep. Well, I know we only have a couple minutes left, so I have maybe two questions for you. So first is just kind of to get a sense of your thought process, because I think this will be relevant for a lot of leaders out there as well. So when a company comes to you with a particular problem, how do you start to approach the problem? Do you have a certain set of steps or a framework that you follow before you are able to come up with a solution or piece of advice?
Yeah, so one of the big things is we try to, and I work on innovation and growth, right? So we try to assess the innovation readiness. So we look at different areas. So we created this thing that you can download for free on the internet. It's called the Innovation Readiness Scorecard. We look at 3 topics: leadership support, organizational design, and innovation practice. And we assess with the leaders each one of these 3 areas, and there are 3 subpoints where we look at, how are they working today? Is all of the investment focused on managing the existing, executing the existing, or do they already think portfolio? They actually have a couple of projects going on, and they made many bets rather than 1 or 2 big bets, right? Things like that. Or do they have, did they give innovation power, organizational design? An example there, that always, bringing in examples helps these companies then. Ping An, a Chinese company that used to be in banking and insurance alone, became a technology player because Peter Ma, the founder, said insurance is going to die and they were going to be disrupted by tech companies. So he hired a lady called Jessica Tan, gave her the title of co-CEO, and her role was to focus just on creating new growth engines. So in that case, innovation has power. In most cases, so back to the assessment, innovation, the people responsible for innovation report to the person who reports to the person who reports to the person who reports to the business unit, who reports to the CTO, who reports to the CEO. If you have that, guess what? All you're going to get is ping pong tables and some kind of, innovation room, but you won't get results. So assessing those things, and sorry for making bad jokes. In Switzerland, we're not known for good jokes, right? But so
I like all your jokes.
If we assess those things, we can make a visual kind of image, an assessment, a snapshot that helps leaders understand. The other aspect that goes with the assessment is simply to kill some of those myths and explain how innovation works today. Because, and I had to learn this, right? It's not as if I figured this out overnight. I had to look stupid 100 times until I looked smart. One example, remember interviewing a CEO on stage, just trying to figure out, and I knew very smart CEO. I asked him why he would rather go for mergers and acquisitions rather than innovation. And he simply told me, mergers and acquisitions, we have a checklist. I hire the lawyers, and the stock market, my investors and analysts, they know exactly, kind of what the ratio is. So even if I fail with some of these, they're okay with it. It's a known process. Now, innovation, that's still a black box. I don't know exactly how that works. My shareholders don't know exactly how that works. Analysts don't know how this works. So that's the challenge, right? So we need to educate leaders. We give them the assessment, but we also need to help them understand what innovation is about. Because these are world-class managers, but innovation is about entrepreneurship and less about management. So it's not that they're not smart enough, it's just that they haven't learned enough about how innovation works. So that's kind of, first, a little bit like a very, a crash course, an entrepreneurship innovation MBA in an hour, and the assessment. and usually looking at, okay, what types of innovation have they done in the past really opens their eyes. So remember the exercise I said at the beginning?
Yep.
Put down, this is a great one. I had to learn this first. So I remember, and with one of the big companies in Southeast Asia, I sat down with the board. I told them, write down your favorite innovations the last, I think it was 5 years or so I said, or 3 years. They wrote down 5 sticky notes, and then I got them to put them on a window in 3 categories: efficiency innovation, sustaining innovation, transformative innovation. Then they can see, the board can see where their innovation effort goes. It all goes in efficiency innovation. So it opens up their eyes to, wow, we're not actually creating the future. So rather than me telling them what to do, I help them visualize where they are, and then they make a strategic choice. Oh, Alex, look, we're not interested right now. We have enough to do to grow in this area. Or, what is more often the case, wow, we just realized we thought we're doing innovation, but all we're doing is playing with technology. We're not transforming the company. So you need to, rather than convincing people, which I believe you can't do that, you can open their eyes by giving them evidence, and then they make the conclusions and they make the decisions.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I have one last question for you. And it's a little out there, so I'm just giving you a warning. But one of the things that I was thinking of when I was reading your book, and you talked about this idea of like a portfolio approach and innovation, I was wondering, can any of these concepts, do you think, be applied to the individual when they are thinking about their own career? Because I know a lot of employees now are getting laid off. They're trying to figure out what they want to do. Some of them are making big changes in their lives and their careers. And it struck me that some of these concepts that you talk about in the book, we can also apply to our own lives as individuals. I don't know if you would agree with that, but I'm really curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I like that question. And maybe rather than the portfolio approach, I think that the really big topic that applies is this dichotomy between exploit and explore. Do I continue to focus on what I'm really good at, my skills, and I just execute and manage what I have? Or do I want to explore new skills, new job opportunities, new arenas? That is something I think is very important. That's one aspect. And I do believe the situation now is a situation where you need to reflect on, is it time to move on from exploit towards exploring something new? And like in an organization, you can say, well, I'm going to explore 20%, but 80% is going to be execution. That's one aspect. The other aspect I actually learned with my kids is some people are more comfortable in the world of exploration, and some people are more comfortable in the world of execution, exploitation. And I think you need to learn, what are you most comfortable with? And the reason I'm mentioning my kids, I did an entrepreneurial project with them. It's a thing called Biz for Kids comic book. And what I started to learn is, well, some aspects of entrepreneurship my kids liked, but some aspects they didn't like. They prefer maybe more the execution part. And then I started to think, well, look, in companies, not everybody needs to be an innovator. Not everybody needs to be one of those people who think breakthrough, etc. Because innovation requires people who are world-class at one skill and they're really good at it. They're not necessarily T-shaped, they don't go that broad, because at the end of the day, success is about teams. Some are much better at being followers and executors, and some are better at being explorers and leaders. And this is not a value judgment. I think both need each other. We tend to sometimes right now these days, we overvalue the explorers. But guess what? Explorers without the right team of executors is not going to work, right? So there's no value judgment there. So I really think figuring out, are you an explorer? Are you more of an executor? That's number one. And then the other one is, well, now is a good time to ask yourself, are you in the right place? Do you want to continue to execute where you are? Or do you want to explore completely new opportunities? Because, life is too short to not explore the things you'd like to explore.
I think that's wonderful advice and a perfect way to wrap up. Alex, I even we got through like a third of the questions that I had for you. That's how interesting or interested I was in all these different concepts. So where can people go to learn more about you? Where can they grab your book? You mentioned a couple of tools out there that people can download. So anything that you want to mention for people to check out and connect with you, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, we have a freemium tradition at Strategize, the company I co-founded. So you can find a quarter of all of our books online for free. So you can have a look at them. They're very visual books. So just go to strategizer.com. You'll see our books. You can get a quarter of them, whatever you like. You can, buy it afterwards. You can sign up to our online courses. We give away a lot for free because for us, what's most important is can we really have an impact and help people do better work? So go and get our free stuff. If you're interested in more, there's always more to get. And, tell us also, what are you missing from us? Give us feedback. So we're always open for that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I had a chance to read the book. I love the visuals in there and the design. It's very, very creative and easy to read. So I appreciate you taking time out of your day. We even went over the typical hour. So I really appreciate you sharing your insights.
Thanks for the awesome questions, Jacob, and keep up the good work. It's great stuff that you're doing.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And thank you everyone again for tuning in. My guest has been Alex Osterwalder. He's the author of the brand new book, which I highly recommend you check out. It's called The Invincible Company. And he's also super easy to find on social media. If you Google him, you'll find his company, you'll find his LinkedIn, articles by him, and all sorts of good stuff. And again, remember, if you enjoyed the show, please remember to give me a review on Apple Podcasts, or you can follow the show on Spotify as well. And I will see all of you next week. Thanks again for tuning into The Future of Work with Jacob Morgan. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please remember to follow me on Spotify, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, or your favorite platform at futureofworkpodcast.com. If you want to reach out to me about sponsoring the show, or if you just have feedback for me, please send me a note at jacob@thefutureorganization.com.